My name is Gus Tugendhat. I'm the founder of a company called Tussell, and we are the market's trusted source of data and insight into UK public contracts. If you've never heard of us until today, then we actually hold some quite good company. Most of the top suppliers to government are long-standing customers of ours for kind of BD and marketing purposes. Many of the top buyers within government rely on our data to power their procurement decisions. And if you're ever kind of browsing the media and reading some story about the use, or more likely the misuse of public contracts, then the facts behind that story probably came from us. So what can I add to a conference like this? I think a lot of you will have heard about data today. Well, I'm actually going to kind of use some and kind of play it back to you. But my own contribution is going to be to give you some context on the market in which you are all operating, the market in which you are procuring. How many people in this room, despite spending quite a lot of money on data and digital, have any idea how much is spent on data and digital across the wider public sector, or perhaps just the type of, the part of government that you work in, or perhaps the region where you're based, or even how your spend compares to adjacent councils, for example, if you're in local government? How many of you in this room are able to benchmark, what you're procuring or how you're procuring it to anybody else in the market that's in a similar position? If you're about to award a substantial contract to a large or perhaps even more importantly, a kind of emerging IT supplier, who else can you speak to about their experience of working with that supplier? So these are not abstract questions. Having data like this at your fingertips is what allows you to power your decisions and to make the right calls. So for the next kind of 10, 15 minutes, I'm going to try and just give you a few stats on the size and shape and trajectory of the overall kind of public sector IT market. And then I'm going to kind of show you a bit of data that poses questions that I think could be the sort of questions that you should be asking yourselves when you are procuring technology or influencing the people who are kind of spending the money. Everything I'm going to show you comes from open procurement data that we've turned into useful data by aggregating it, cleansing it, standardizing it, and augmenting it. You may agree or disagree with the conclusions that I draw or the data that I show you, but all of it can be audited back to an individual contract or an invoice. Ultimately, all our data comes from the data which public bodies publish openly. So so essentially I'm kind of playing back what you guys put out there. So a good example of what the previous speaker referred to as kind of taking this official data and kind of turning it back into something that is useful to citizens and to yourselves and to business. So let's just start nice and broad and then kind of work inwards a little bit. What I'm showing you is a chart showing how much the wider public sector spent on IT in terms of literally invoices paid, not just contracts awarded. Those are very lumpy. This is based on invoices paid over the last 5 years. And I think one kind of punchline from this is that the market is huge, about 16 billion in the year ended March 2023, that's equivalent to between 5 and 10% of all kind of public procurement. So it's a huge market, but it's also a growing market. You can see that the market kind of took a big leap in 2021, which coincided with the pandemic, and also with the implementation of Brexit. So the market kind of surged during that year. It remained stable in the second year of the pandemic, and then it just continued growing at that same historical base from what is a bigger baseline. So whether you are suppliers to government or you are procuring on behalf of government, the message is that this is a huge and very persistent market. This slide shows a breakdown of that overall market by what we call biotype: central government, local government, NHS. I don't think there are any big surprises here, but a couple of things to point out. Yes, central government accounts for the largest proportion of spend, but actually it's still only half the market. So I think people often kind of overlook the size of the market outside of central government. And I think just to drill into that, the other point I would make is the kind of shifting or diverging trajectory between local government, which accounted for 18% of the market in year one, and then had gone down to 16% by year 5. And if you compare that to the NHS, which was the same size as local government at the start, and now has grown to nearly 30% of the market. So government is not a single kind of monolithic thing. There are lots of different stories within this marketplace. And you need to kind of understand that to be able to make the right decisions depending on which part of the market that you're in. That point is also kind of quite well made on this slide here, where we show the top 10. On the left, you can see the top 10 bodies by annual spend on IT in the fiscal year ending March 2023. I don't think there's a big surprise about them. Not everybody has that sort of data at their fingertips, but I don't think there are any big surprises there. But what is quite interesting is kind of the different trends behind that spend. So if you have a look here, over this 3-year or 4-year period of time, IT spend by HMRC grew by kind of about 80%. Ignore these figures, that's something else for a second. Whereas kind of pure IT spend by the MOD was almost flat over that same period. So two very big kind of ministerial departments, or kind of in one case a kind of executive agency, spending a lot on IT, but with very different growth trajectories. And then this relates to the proportion of total procurement accounted for by IT. So again, to choose two quite kind of similar departments, the Home Office and Ministry of Justice, both of them in kind of security, if you like, they're both spending a kind of similar-ish amount, but actually the Home Office spends nearly twice as much as the MOD, as the MOJ on IT as a proportion of the total budget. And kind of that is quite significant if you are kind of selling to either one of those departments. But what does it also tell you about the impact or about the efficiency of those two departments, or about their ability to kind of deliver the public services that we all rely on them to deliver? This slide shows something similar, but I think it's just for local government, and it's on a kind of regional basis. So, look at look at the different trajectory, for example, of the Northwest and the Northeast. Not only does the Northwest spend more on IT overall, 240 million versus kind of 100 million, but over the time period, that spend has grown by 32% versus 8%. Or look, for example, the difference. I think it was. Wait, I'll just have a look at my notes. No, so actually, kind of, you can make your own you can draw your own conclusion about that. My point was really which regions. What does it tell you about which regions are transforming digitally faster than others? And which regions are at risk of falling behind by not moving quickly enough on this sort of thing. Another kind of interesting thing that we look at is the proportion of procurement from SMEs. And that is what you can see in the kind of, I don't know what to call it, in the kind of beige color here. So you've got the procurement from the top 10 suppliers within central government, NHS and local government. They would be different top 10 in each one. Then you've got how much they spent with everybody else, and then you've got how much they spent with SMEs. And what you can see is that the central government is kind of struggling to move the needle on how much it procures directly from SMEs. The NHS is doing better, and local government is doing best of all. So the sort of question to ask, in my opinion, from kind of data like this is, what can the rest of government learn from local government about procuring locally, or procuring from SMEs, or procuring from VCSEs? Some of what make that possible in local government, those conditions are not in place at the MOD, for example. But again, if more of this data was understood and people were kind of taking this into account when making decisions, they might be making those decisions in slightly different ways. Another question that comes up quite a lot is how much procurement is going via frameworks. And this is quite a telling slide here. 87% of IT contracts within blue light were called off from frameworks. Similar level for the NHS, less for central government, and much less for local government. So I'm not saying that, that kind of blue light's doing really well and local government's doing really badly. Not at all. I'm just pointing out that they procure in completely different ways. And maybe the fact that local government makes relatively lower use of frameworks to purchase IT might also be one of the reasons why they manage to funnel more of that procurement directly to SMEs. So again, if you're a buyer, what does this tell you about best practice? And if you're a supplier, kind of what does it tell you about the kind of, the demand that's out there for the services that you're selling? Just to kind of build on the framework point, this shows the top 5 frameworks for purchasing digital by the 3 main buyer types. So something jumped out to me when I was looking at this. Central government only accounts for about 50% of all IT spend, and yet it accounts for more than 80% of the purchasing via G-Cloud. So if you're on G-Cloud, it's a really great route to market for central government, but it's not really what is being primarily used by local government or the NHS. So again, don't take any of these things for granted. Frameworks have proliferated in recent years, and it makes it all the more important to understand whether you're a buyer or a supplier, which are the right frameworks that you should be focusing on. And finally, this is the last slide. There are just under £9 billion worth of live service-based IT contracts rolling off in the 2-year period from Q3 this year to the end of Q2 2026. And what's the relevance of that? The relevance of that is that there is a £9 billion opportunity to kind of challenge the incumbent if you are a supplier to government. And there is a £9 billion opportunity to inject more competition, more diversity, more resilience into your supply chain if you are a buyer of services. So get ahead of these contracts and use them to mitigate risk. Use them to drive value. Use them to get more kind of social value out of your procurement. That was it. What I would hope that you have taken away from this is that the purchasing power of public sector is huge, even in the context of flat or declining budgets. You don't just have a responsibility, but also an opportunity to get maximum value out of that procurement, not just economically, but socially as well. And for that, you need data to power those decisions. And that is exactly, providing you with that data, is exactly the first step in meeting those challenges that Tussell can enable you to make. I hope you found it useful. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm Gus Tugendhat. Thank you very much.